Hey, brother, hear me now. Brother dog, know me, understand.
Welcome to the Sargassum Podcast. I'm Robbie Thigpen.
I'm Francisca Elmer.
And I am Mar Fernandez. And we are your hosts for today. And we are going to share with you the latest ideas and concepts about sargassum and sargassum beaching events which have become an international challenge.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Robbie.
Morning.
How was your flight back from Mexico?
Well, it seemed like one of those never-ending journeys again. We woke up about 2:30 in the morning to drive to Merida and to catch the flight, and then I got into Raleigh about 7 o'clock that night, and so it was a long day. But I got lots of hugs when I got there, and I was getting hugs when I left, and by all the little guys and all that. So it was all in all, it was a pretty good day. And one of the highlights from my trip to Quintana Roo was getting to hang out with you and Playa and meeting you for the first time. And that was a pretty big thing awesome. There. And I really enjoyed our time there with you and Joseph, and it was a pretty good, cool time. And the trip itself went pretty good, and I was very, very happy with the results from the trip. It looks like our project is going to be well underway, and we've made some new friends with the Akumal Monkey Sanctuary over there with Steffi and all those folks, and we we met with old friends and made new friends at the University of Quintana Roo and with the marine megafauna folks over there, and of course got everything taken care of with the La Universidad Intercultural Maya de Quintana Roo. We have an official research agreement with him now, and we finalized the details of a research agreement with the Department of Indigenous Education at SEC. And so things are getting pretty excited with our research, and I'm really happy to be a part of the Sargassum Podcast too, because both of these projects is about clear communication amongst all stakeholder groups, and so it's really nice to be associated with these two different entities that is all about talking to people and communicating. So thank you.
Yes, and today we have our second guest, this time from the west coast of Africa. The other guest was from Tanzania. Robbie, do you want to introduce him?
Yeah, me and Professor Kwasi just had a nice little chat there, and talking about some things. But he's Professor Kwasi Appiah-Addo, and he's a coastal processes specialist with a vast experience in the West African coast. He's in Ghana right now, and he's director of the Institute of Environment and Sanitation Studies at the University of Ghana. His recent focus has been research on developing an integrated approach to sustainable port development, which embraces three perspectives of engineering: ecosystem services and governance, sargassum in West Africa, and he is a member of the expert group of high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy, who provide advice to the high-level panel of 13 heads of government. So we got a pretty important guy here with us today, and welcome, Kwasi.
Thank you very much.
Kwasi, we ask all our guests as a first question, what is sargassum to them?
Okay, let me start by saying a big thank you to you for inviting me, and I'm very happy to have this discussion with you. So sargassum is basically a large brown seaweed. It's a seaweed that floats in an island, shape, the form of an island. It floats on the ocean. So it's an island-like masses and never attaches to the sea floor. And we have sargassum all over, and recently it's been a huge problem within the Atlantic. So sargassum in West Africa was observed around 2011. So basically, it's a seaweed, a brown type of seaweed, which is devastating the some portions of the coastal areas where are called the vulnerable areas. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. And in what ways, when I was there with Francisco, just about earlier this month, we Quintana Roo had just had a severe, massive influx of sargassum. It was really yucky. When she had arrived just a couple of days before that, she could smell the rotting sargassum from the bus station. And when we were down there at the beach, we saw a lot of bad stuff. Exactly what levels has sargassum impacted Ghana? Not just in the past, but this year as well. Have y'all been getting these huge, severe impacts, or has it been kind of similar to previous years?
I think it keeps changing in terms of quantity, from year to year, and as the volume changes, the impact also changes. But generally, the impacts are the same. It impacts the coastal environment. And what we observe in Ghana is that sargassum problem is not along the entire coast. It's concentrated more on the western coast of Ghana, where we share boundary with Cote d'Ivoire. So within the western coast of Ghana, we have huge problem with sargassum. As we speak now, fishermen, artisanal fishers, small-scale fishers, they go to fish and they eventually fish sargassum instead of fishing or going to look for fish. So instead of harvesting fish, they rather harvest sargassum. And it's really having a huge impact on the small-scale fishing industry. Again, gradually we're developing our coastal tourism. And sargassum, when they beach along the coast, it becomes very difficult to attract people to such coastal areas. So it's also affecting the small scale, let me put it that way, small scale businesses in terms of tourism and hospitality activities. So it's affecting hugely the fishing industry, and it's also affecting the hospitality industry. And you also realize that people who are into the small-scale fishing industry happen to be the poorest among the poor in the communities. So sargassum is really having a huge economic impact because they are unable to go to fishing when the beaching are very high. And if they go to fishing and they catch sargassum, it's a product they cannot sell. So it's really making the poor poorer, and also making some areas that are vulnerable highly unattractive for tourism activities.
Let me expand on that just a little bit. As we both know, seagrass and mangroves are very important to these fisheries for juvenile and nursery habitats for mainly all the stuff we like to eat live there at some phase of its life. And are you seeing any damage to the seagrass meadows or the mangroves as a result of these massive beaching events?
I wouldn't say they are having impact on the mangroves, in that area, because that area we don't have much mangrove. So I wouldn't say that. But what I can say is that because of the inadequate fishing landing sites, we tend to have a lot of natural landing sites. So the beaches are the natural landing site for the fishermen. So once you have sargassum beaching on these beaches, it becomes extremely difficult for the fishermen to land their catch. That is, if they are able to catch some fish. So sometimes you have to travel further off or away from where you would naturally have landed the fish, and that also increases costs. So environmentally, it's having impact. Economically, it's having impact, and socially, it's also having impact. But with regards to the mangroves along the beach, I don't think we have experienced that impact on the mangroves.
Do you experience any health impacts? Like, do people have health impacts from the gases from the decomposing sargassum, or is that less of a problem?
Yes, in fact, discussions we've had with people who live along the coast where sargassum is prevalent there, they report of itching. When they come into contact with the sargassum, they're experiencing, body itching. So that is also something that we may have to look at. So it has some health implication. And then when they are decomposing, they give up very unpleasant odor. So that makes it extremely difficult to live in those areas, especially when the sargassum are decomposing. So they have some level of health impact on the communities.
Yeah, that's true. So you are part of SARTRAC, which is a collaboration that spans not just in Africa, but also to the Caribbean. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Thank you very much. And SARTRAC project is looking at sargassum within the Atlantic, and is looking at the Caribbean and then the West Africa. So we're doing a collaborative research to look at the common issues, and how the basic concept behind SARTRAC is how do we ensure that sargassum that is currently seen as a major problem, how do we derive some positiveness out of the sargassum? How do we use sargassum as a resource so that the poorest in the poor community can have some economic gains from sargassum? So that's basically what the SARTRAC research is doing. So we're working with our colleagues in the Caribbean. They have a lot of experience when it comes to issues regarding sargassum. West Africa, the problems are emerging, and as I said, we started having this problem with sargassum from 2011. So we are now beginning to identify the issues, and the research is looking at the connection between the sargassum issue in the Caribbean and that in West Africa. So we can share ideas, we have common problems, so can we have common solutions? And how do people in these areas that are highly vulnerable or considered vulnerable can benefit from sargassum as a problem, into sargassum becoming a commodity that would be of use?
Yeah, very nice. One of the things I've been learning, we've had some very technical interviews here talking about blue carbon and sinking stuff and a lot of things. But some of the interviews that I've enjoyed the most have been with people who are making soaps, organic fertilizers, and papers from these things. There are a lot of people doing some very interesting things with this, and I think that a lot of these things could eventually become, high value export commodities that could bring money into these communities, and those are some of the most exciting things to me, things that can, when the way sargassum can be used in that way. And we've also interviewed people that are taking the wastewater from rum distilleries and making biofuel with when they mix it with sargassum. So there's a lot of interesting stuff out there, and I hope you'll that you're all spreading this kind of information around. This is just very exciting to me. And all. So can you tell us a little bit about your role in SARTRAC?
Yes, so before I tell you about my role, so in summary to the previous question, I can say that SARTRAC is also trying to identify the adaptation opportunities that can be generated through the management and reuse of the invasive sargassum. So what are the adaptation opportunities that are there, which we can identify? Now, my role in the project is managing the Ghana part of the project. So we have this consortium between Ghana, the Caribbean, and then University of Southampton, as well as University of York in the UK. So I am managing the Ghana part of the project. And what I'm doing is to help in using drones, remote sensing, and GIS to monitor and map the West Africa Sargassum flow. So we want to understand the flow in West Africa. So those of us in Ghana, I am working, we're working to try and use the drone and remote sensing approach in addition to GIS to map sargassum flow in West Africa. We also want to identify the impact of sargassum. And like I mentioned, how is it impacting on the fisheries, activities and then other related activities along our coast? And then what are the adaptation opportunities that are there? So we are looking at all these, and I'm part of the team that is looking at all these in Ghana. And then we're also looking at what are the existing policies? And are the existing policies addressing issues that are related to sargassum? If they are not, then how can our project inform policy decision in Ghana, and that which can also be rolled over to the West Africa? So we're trying to identify the social and economic distribution of gains and losses from sargassum impact, as well as to adaptation used to manage the invasion. So that is generally the role that I am playing, looking at the biophysical dynamics and looking at the how it can, integrated into policy decisions so that beyond Ghana, West Africa can also benefit from it.
Very cool, and I think that's very needed, that looking at not just your country but how the actually work with sargassum and turn it into opportunity, especially since you said the fishermen are already taking it out. So if there was just some way of using it, they could make money with it. You also proposed to set up a network for the Gulf of Guinea on sargassum. Why do you think such a network is needed?
Yes, thank you again. You realize that because the problem has not been well researched into in West Africa, you have people looking at it from different angles and not in a well coordinated manner. So the basic concept behind the network is to identify all the key stakeholders who have interest in sargassum activities and bring the stakeholders together so that we can use a common platform to address our common problem. Because sargassum is now being identified in quite a number of the West African countries. So can we identify those who are doing research into sargassum in West Africa, and what lessons are they learning? Can we identify those who have general interest in sargassum, and what are their interests? Can we identify those in the policy arena who are, what are the issues? So the network is to bring all the people who are interested in West Africa, identify them, bring them together so that we can begin to sensitize, our communities, sensitize our government about the issues of sargassum. And you also realize that we need to really understand what is going on in terms of sargassum. And when I talk about understanding, trying to understand the sources of sargassum, the drivers, the transport, the frequency and predictability of sargassum. So can we come together and go and look for funding so as to be able to research into these problems and come up with solutions that will be of benefit to our sub-region? So I think that the network will create that platform where we can share ideas, where we can share our challenges, and where we can share our success stories together. And we can do this through webinars, which we are planning to organize a webinar quite soon. We can do this through workshops. We can do this through conferences, so where we share our success stories together. So that is the whole idea, bringing together all the interested stakeholders so that we can talk about sargassum in West Africa.
Actually did that in the Caribbean. So as you probably know, people like Brigitte van Tussenbroek and Ligia and Claire Morale, they all got together and we're like, okay, we need a network. And we had our first meeting at a conference, I think in 2019. Yes, I think 2019, with about 10, 15 people in the room. Some people joining from their computers. And then SARCnet was coming out of it, and now it is a pretty big community of scientists and other people who are exchanging how they're working with Sargassum, and it helps definitely to collaborate.
Yes, so that is what we want to do in West Africa. In addition to that, we also need to identify how to, create a platform for discussion. So this will also give us that platform where we can have discussions on Sargassum, and then also where I believe we can begin to look at things, and talk about the problems, and I think once we are confronted with the problem, we are better, we are in a better position to talk about the problems at that level. And one other thing that we also want to do with the network is to have a bulletin where we can periodically put in the public domain, issues with regards to Sargassum in a bulletin form, so that policymakers, people who have interest in these areas, scientists can also read and get to know what is going on. Yeah.
Well, if you get this bulletin going, make sure that you send us links to it every time they come out, and we'll share that material on our social media account so that we can get the word out to a larger audience, and also, so we appreciate that. And because the more information that we have out there, the better. And if we're not sharing the information, we're hoarding it. And that's what a lot about what our project is about sharing information. So thank you for that. That's a wonderful idea. And but going back to the network, my project, I'm trying to set up a global network doing things. Acknowledging local ecological knowledge systems are important, and integrating that into Western science. What steps do you think need to be taken to create a network like you're trying to set up?
Yeah. A network like this, first of all, need to identify the key people who will be interested. Identify the key people is a major hurdle that we have to, because you don't have a lot of publications where you can contact people who are authors and are already doing things in this area. So we need to find a way of identifying key parties or key interested people to be part of it. So that is the first step. And the second one is sharing the vision together. You can identify somebody, but if the person is not buying into the vision, it becomes difficult to establish the network. So we will also spend time to share the vision and let them appreciate why the need for such a network. And probably the third one is bringing people with different views, different opinions together. Because people have different views. Some see it as a huge nuisance. It's a huge problem, and we don't want to have anything to do with Sargassum. How do you convince such a person to buy into the vision that although it may be a nuisance, but we need to talk about it, so that what we are going through today, future generation will not go through it, or at least future generation will have something to build upon to make their life better than we have it today. So bringing them together, bringing people with different views, different ideology, different concept is something that we also need to work on. So these are the three key things that I consider as steps in setting up the network. And of course, hinging these three key things together is funding. So for us to move it forward, we will need money to actualize this vision that we have.
Yes, for sure. It does take a lot of funding to get people together, and it also takes a lot of time to research who all is in this field, and then creating these spaces where discussion can take place is also a huge task. I want to talk to you a little bit about climate change as well. So you have been nominated for the Climate Change and Environmental Millennium Excellent Award in 2020. And I know you have looked at a lot of things climate change related on the coast of Ghana. So I wanted to ask you, what kind of changes have you seen on the coast of Ghana and in the region due to climate change?
Thank you very much. So from Sargassum to climate change and climate change related issues along the coast of Ghana. Yes, we are experiencing impacts of climate change, and the impacts are very, very severe along our coast. The first one I can talk about is increased coastal erosion, and increasing coastal erosion is now being felt along greater part of our coast in Ghana. So we've identified some hotspots where erosion is a major issue. And then there's also increasing flooding in recent times. And areas that used not to flood are now being flooded. We are now experiencing increasing storm surge. So the low-lying areas are now being flooded, and some areas are even getting inundated. We are also experiencing sea level rise, gradually experiencing sea level rise, and that can explain why we are also experiencing flooding. So you realize that sea level rise is really being fueled by climate change. And again, some farmers along the coast are also experiencing seawater intrusion. So instead of having fresh water for their farm products, now some are experiencing the presence of seawater, and this is really affecting coastal farming activities. So by and large, climate change is really having a toll on the coast of Ghana. We are also now researching into how subsidence is also playing a role in all these things. So we agree that human activities has influenced some of the changes, but climate change is also driving a huge change along our coast, and it's having huge impact on the livelihood of people within the coastal area. But again, talking about impact on the eastern side of our coast, where we have the Volta Delta, erosion is very high in those areas, and we can attribute erosion to the effect of climate change because sea level is rising and there are so many activities. And because of the increased erosion and increasing flooding, we are also experiencing, or we identified that there is some level of migration from the vulnerable communities. But it will interest you to know that the migration is more related on, or is on the line of gender. You tend to have the men migrating, leaving behind the women and the children. So now we are also having what I term as increasing female-headed household. So female are now heading households. They are taking care of the children, providing for the needs of the family, and ensuring that they also play the role of husband, because the men are migrating to go and look for money and then bring the money home. So there's been a lot of impact on the coastal area in terms of climate change, and their associated impact on the social and economic life of people along the coast is severe.
Wow. Yeah, that definitely sounds like climate change is here and it's real, not like some people still think it's something for the future.
Unfortunately, we have evidence to, unfortunately, we have evidence to show that climate change is real, is here, and the impact is felt, and we all need to do something about it.
Yeah, one world, one people, one team.
Yeah.
And that's the only way to deal with these massive global issues today is realizing it's one team.
Yes.
Are there any adaptation and resilience in projects going on in Ghana to help people deal with climate change?
Yes, there are a couple of funded projects that are going on in Ghana and looking at adaptation. and how are people adapting to some of these, and also there are some mitigation, measures that are also being put in place. So there are a couple of projects. Project we did called the DECMA project. We looked at we looked at climate change, and we look at vulnerability, the risk, and then we also try to look at how migration is being used as an adaptation tool in the vulnerable areas. And we identified that people are now using migration as an adaptation, within the vulnerable areas, that are being hugely impacted by climate change. But apart from that, there are some measures that are going on trying to lessen the impact of climate change on the people. People are also on their own way trying to adapt to the situation. Some are developing new ways to coexist with the system, with a new normal. People are developing new ways to coexist with the system. So some are coming out with innovative sources of livelihood, so as to be able to make up for the lost livelihood as a result of the impact of climate change. So, and again, we are also experiencing a huge decline in fish stock, so as a result of climate change. So the fishermen are also being impacted. So we are now encouraging the fishermen to go into aquaculture, so as to be able to make up for the losses. And those that can go into other type of activities are also being given opportunities to do that. And last week we were in one area, a vulnerable area, where we identified that female-headed headship has increased as a result of the migration of male, as I talked about. And we had a project where we looked at how do we ensure that these females are not unduly disadvantaged. So we look at the challenges, because the problem is that they also don't have easy access to land. So land tenure becomes a major problem. So farming, they can farm, but some of them may not be able to own a land. Okay, so these were some of the challenges that we were looking at. So yes, there are some projects going on trying to look at how best we can help the communities that are vulnerable in terms of adaptation and in terms of mitigation.
Excellent. I really like what you said about fishermen going into mariculture projects and stuff like that. I think that a big part of what we're looking at for our research is that when you come into a community and say you can't do this anymore, so many times an alternative is not offered, and a couple things we're trying to integrate into our materials is how a couple of brothers, for example, could have a small aquaculture project, replace that protein, and also replace some of the money that would be generated doing this other stuff. We're working on something right now with a young lady in Jose Maria Morelos. She works with bees, because honey can be a very valuable secondary income as well. So we just consider that to be a very important part of conservation efforts, is alternative ways to replace protein in these finances. And so I was really glad to hear you talking about that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, I think we're at the end of our interview. Unless, Robbie, you have another question for Kwasi.
Oh, I think I've got a lot to unpack with this interview already, and he shared a lot of interesting things with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And let me also say thank you again, and wish you well. Bye-bye.
Okay, we'll be in contact.
All
Take
right.
care, Kwasi.
Thank you so much, Kwasi.
You're welcome. Bye.
Wow, Francisco, what do you think about all that?
It was really interesting. I mean, it just seems to be an even bigger struggle in Africa than in the Caribbean, because there's less funding available, and in the Caribbean people have come together already forming this network, but in Africa they're just starting to do that. So yeah, I really hope that it will work out to make this network, because I think they really need it. And yeah, so that they can do the work in a more coordinated way and help each other out and collaborate and really find opportunities that work for Africa and the coast there.
Yeah, well, you talked about Caribbean being already prepared a little bit better, and that's certainly true. There are people that are better prepared, or different nations, but some of the nations have kind of dropped the ball on it, and with these severe inundations of this season, being caught with their pants down, and they're a day late and a dollar short, whereas some of the countries around them, I talked to a couple of people in one particular country, and no, it's not happening here. They work with the lobster fishery in that country. No, it's not happening here. And yet we know that it is for, I don't want to say too much to identify who these people are, but it's happening there. I'm like, I'm sorry, you work with you're about education and you're working with the lobster fishery. Of course it's happening there. How can you tell me that? I know better. And so these are biologists and all that have been, sitting on the sidelines thinking things are going to get better. So it's not just, that's just not a West Africa thing. It's happening in the region where we work the most as well. And I could name several countries right now that are essentially caught with their pants down, have no idea. Oh, what is this? It's never been this bad before. Like,
yeah,
we told you it was coming. We told you.
You are very right. However, at least they already have a network going of scientists and governments and a lot of webinars where people learn from each other, which they would be in even more trouble if they didn't have that. But yes, sargassum is a huge problem, and when it arrives on as big masses, as much of an influx as it is this year, and it may be the biggest year yet, even bigger than 2018, all these governments and hotels, they are still not prepared for these masses. And part of it may be because they don't have the funds to just get extra boats, get extra barriers, and then sometimes these things also don't work. Like if you have high seas, then the sargassum gets over the barrier and you cannot get the boat out. We had a boat actually sink here in Quintana Roo like a few weeks ago. So then they are like, okay, we cannot go out on this rough seas. We have to keep the sargassum boats in. And then you're back at shoveling off the beaches, this massive amount of sargassum that arrives.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's just been people like, oh yeah, we're going to do the minimum we can instead of carrying it to the next level. But I think this year has really got people's attention of that we need to be looking at preventative measures as opposed to just reactive measures, and that's that preventative projects has to be a priority, I believe, and deal with after it gets here, but try to mitigate it before it before it makes the beach stink.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, when we were walking through there the other day, down from the cenote by the sea, and I stepped in that stuff and sank up to my knees. It seemed like the nastiest stuff I'd ever been in my life. It was just, and I've been done a lot of things, but that just completely grossed me out. And it was up to my knee and just rotting sargassum. I had no idea it was that deep right there, and that was on the beach. And
yes. And there's
I'm
people
sure
spending hours a day cleaning up that rotting mess on the beach.
Well, they were running those machines there the entire time I was there, cleaning it up, and it doesn't look like they did anything much more than put a dent in it, and because it kept coming in, and these things need to be scaled up, and we need to
the problem
protect
is
this stuff.
money, right? Like these governments and also the hotels, they don't have
Well,
as much funds.
that particular hotel, I think it had the money. That's that
I don't
particular
know,
one.
but part of the beach, like where the cenote is public beach, and then we walked past the hotel, and then we got to the public beach again. So you have all these different players, And
Oh no, I
yeah,
agree with that, but
and
it was still bad in front of that hotel.
unfortunately,
And that hotel must have been about a half a kilometer long. Or I mean,
yes,
it was
but
huge.
it is
And
huge, but it also had COVID-related losses in income during all of last year and this year. So I don't think many of the hotels have a lot of money over to clean up sargassum, you
well,
know?
I'm not saying all in general. I was talking about this specific one huge giant hotel, and yeah, there's certainly a lot of smaller. I mean, I think most hotels are smaller than that, and certainly they would be struggling. My point was that this huge hotel that looks like it has tremendous assets was also struggling,
Yes.
and
Because probably as a huge hotel, it had even bigger losses due to COVID because it had even less people staying there. And, it also means there's a lot of staff to pay and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if a bigger hotel actually has better means now that we had COVID and that they're struggling overall. But
Yeah.
everybody's struggling a bit.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, if you don't get it cleaned up, people aren't going to want to come to the beach, which is going to continue that downward spiral.
Yes.
Yeah.
The other really interesting thing I thought about the interview, getting back to Africa rather than talking about Quintana Roo in our debrief, was his observation that the men are migrating due to climate change, leaving the women to look after their families. And I've read lately in different places saying that women are more vulnerable to climate change impacts, and this really clearly shows an example of that.
Well, yeah. Well, women are usually the group that's women and children are usually the group that's most severely impacted by any environmental disasters because they're the ones that are the least mobile and all. I think women in general, but more over probably women with children and all that which gets doubly hard. And so yeah, it's interesting to hear him describing it the way he is. I think that's the first time we've had anybody bring that up in our podcast, and though it was sad to be aware of, I'm really glad that that it was brought up and brought to the forefront, and we can begin that discussion, and maybe we can include questions about stuff like that in our future interviews.
Yes, for sure.
Well, excellent, everybody. Thank you for being here today with our first West Africa interview for the Professor Kwasi in Ghana, and we're very happy to have him here. And Franziska and I are glad to be here again today, and we're very glad you could have been anywhere in the world today, and you chose to be here with us. So we're really thankful, and we welcome you to the podcast. Let everybody know about our work because we won't. Our project's about communication, and if everybody's not hearing about us, we're not doing our job well. So please feel free to like and share us and all that kind of stuff. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Yes, me too. Have a good week, everyone.
Thank you for tuning in today and learning with us from our guests. If you want more information about what our guests talk about today, then please check our show notes for links and information in our archives. And don't forget to like and share our podcast with your friends.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please consider supporting us financially by becoming a Patreon. For as little as $1 per month, you can support us and get the exclusive benefit of submitting questions for our interviewees before the interview.
The Sargassum Podcast is produced by Marine Conservation Without Borders and is made possible with financial support from Seafields. It is produced by Marcel Van de Kamp, Lauren Blankenship, Cleo Maridakas, Franziska Elmer, and Eloise Lopez, and is hosted by Robbie Thigpen, Franziska Elmer, Mar Fernandez, Florence Menez, Cleo Maridakis, and Paula Diaz.
We will be back next week with another exciting guest. The music of this podcast is from the song Demapre by Drizzle the Roadrunner, an artist from Roatan. Follow him on Spotify or YouTube for more music, but for now, here is the full song, Demapre.
Hey, brother, hear me now. Brother, dog. Now me understand. Now for them no want to see we get nothing. That's why them a pray and always front and star. Now for them no want to see we get nothing. That's why them a pray. Now for them a pray. Them a pray. Them a pray. Me no gain progress. Now for them a pray. Them a pray. Me no reap success. Now for them a pray. Them a pray. Them a pray. Me no gain progress. Now for them a pray. Them a pray. Me no reap success. So me tell them yeah, rappers is come and me no take that. Only if it come from Jah, I'll accept that. Now for them me put me trust in and give me setback. Yo, select that, we'll and pull up that. Tell some wicked that bad mind, me no fear them. Anytime them cheat and chat, me no hear them. Me dash a few hard soak for the queer them. Me dash a few hard soak, tell them where them. Now for them a pray. Them a pray, me no gain progress. Now for them a pray. Them a pray, me no reap success. So me tell them yeah. Yes, me know me have a lot of fake friends, but me never woulda thought me woulda have fake family. So me tell them straight, me no trust them. Me no trust you and me no trust him. Fake friend lost bad mind in a real life. Star me no rate that, star me no rate that. But me real for me woulda bust a million shot in a real life. Now for them a pray. Them a pray, me no gain progress. Now for them a pray. Them a pray, me no reap success. Now for them a pray. Them a pray, me no gain progress. Now for them a pray. Them a pray, me no reap success. So me tell them yeah. Oh, them a pray, me no reap success. Screaming out loud. Me woulda tell them to go look alike, but them a hate and grudge and creep on mine. Them a move like Judas. Them a move like Judas. Plus, everybody have a life to live. So me give one rascal who a try judge me. Like them chit and chat, so what them want to say. Cause none of them out there nah feed. Now for them a pray. Them a pray, me no gain progress. Now for them a pray. Them a pray, me no reap success. Now for them a pray. Them a pray, me no gain progress. Now for them a pray. Them a pray, me no reap success. Oh, five-star production. 1101. Them a pray, me no reap success.